They found them at dawn. Dozens of coyote bodies piled beneath the Skinwalker Ranch sign like some kind of grotesque offering. No wounds, no blood, no signs of struggle or predation, just dead animals stacked in a pattern that made the security team immediately call for scientific backup. And when Dr. Travis Taylor arrived on scene, the first thing he said was, "This violates every principle of natural animal behavior I know." Within 48 hours, officials from multiple agencies descended on the property: wildlife biologists, federal investigators, veterinary pathologists. And after examining the scene, reviewing the overnight security footage, and conducting preliminary autopsies, they made an unprecedented decision: label the incident as potentially paranormal in origin, because nothing in conventional science could explain what happened to those coyotes or why it happened at Skinwalker Ranch. Subscribe now, because what we're about to reveal will challenge everything you thought you knew about what's possible at America's most paranormally active property. It was March 17th when Dragon, Skinwalker Ranch's head of security, made his routine morning patrol of the property perimeter. The sun was just coming up over the Utah desert, casting long shadows across the 512-acre ranch. Dragon had been doing this patrol for years, checking fence lines, examining overnight camera footage, making sure nothing unusual had occurred during the night hours when the ranch is most active. But as he approached the main entrance, the weathered sign reading Skinwalker Ranch visible in the early light, he saw something that made him stop the vehicle immediately. A massive pile of what appeared to be animal bodies directly beneath the ranch sign. From a distance, he couldn't identify the species, but the sheer number of carcasses was immediately alarming. Dragon radioed base camp immediately. His voice, normally calm and professional even when reporting strange phenomena, carried an edge of genuine concern. "We have a situation at the main entrance. Multiple animal casualties. I need the science team out here now." He didn't approach the pile initially. Years of working at Skinwalker Ranch had taught him that unusual scenes should be documented before being disturbed. When the initial response team arrived, they confirmed what Dragon had seen. Coyotes, dozens of them. At least 40 bodies, possibly more, stacked in what appeared to be a deliberate pile directly under the ranch entrance sign. The arrangement wasn't random. The bodies were layered, almost organized, in a way that suggested intentional placement rather than natural accumulation. But what immediately struck everyone present was what wasn't there. No blood, no visible wounds, no signs of struggle in the surrounding dirt, no tracks other than the coyote's own paw prints leading to the location. And perhaps most disturbing, no scavenger activity. In the Utah desert, dead animals attract scavengers within hours. Ravens, vultures, other coyotes, insects. But these bodies appeared untouched by any other wildlife. The team immediately secured the scene and began documentation. Photographs from multiple angles, video recording, measurements of the pile's dimensions, an account of the bodies, which eventually reached 43 individual coyotes of varying ages and both sexes. That number itself was significant. Coyotes are typically solitary hunters or operate in small family groups. To have 43 individuals in one location simultaneously violated normal behavioral patterns. Dr. Travis Taylor, the ranch's chief scientist, was off property that morning, but was immediately contacted. His response was to drop everything and drive directly to Skinwalker Ranch, calling in additional expertise en route. Because even over the phone, hearing the description of what had been found, he knew this wasn't a natural occurrence. And he knew that whatever investigation followed would need to be documented meticulously because the findings were going to be extraordinary. Dr. Travis Taylor arrived at Skinwalker Ranch 3 hours after the discovery. As an astrophysicist and aerospace engineer with decades of experience in scientific investigation, Taylor approaches anomalies with rigorous methodology. He's investigated everything from advanced propulsion systems to unexplained aerial phenomena. But as he later told colleagues, nothing in his scientific background prepared him for the scene beneath that ranch sign. Taylor's first action was to establish a controlled perimeter and ensure no one had disturbed the scene beyond initial documentation. He needed to preserve evidence integrity before conducting detailed analysis. Then he began his examination, starting with the overall scene configuration and working down to individual carcasses. The pile's arrangement immediately struck him as non-random. The bodies were oriented in a pattern, heads generally pointing inward, with larger individuals at the base and smaller ones toward the top. That kind of organization doesn't happen naturally. When animals die in groups, whether from disease, poisoning, or environmental factors, they fall randomly. This looked arranged. An arrangement implies intelligence and purpose. Taylor examined individual carcasses for signs of trauma. In his own words, captured on the investigation video, I'm looking at these animals and I see no external injuries, no gunshot wounds, no signs of blunt force trauma, no indication of predator attacks. These coyotes didn't die from physical violence. So what killed them? The condition of the bodies presented another puzzle. They appeared to have died recently within the past 12 to 18 hours, based on rigor mortis and environmental factors. But there was no decomposition smell, which should have been present in 40-plus dead animals even after just hours in the desert heat. Taylor noted this absence repeatedly during his examination, clearly troubled by the implication that normal biological processes weren't occurring as expected. Most disturbing to Taylor was the behavioral impossibility of the scene. Coyotes are intelligent, cautious animals. They don't congregate in large numbers. They're territorial. They avoid areas with heavy human activity. For 43 coyotes to be in the same location simultaneously, close enough to end up in a pile together, violated everything known about coyote social behavior and territorial patterns. Taylor made a statement that would later be widely quoted. "In 30 years of scientific investigation, I've never encountered a scenario where the evidence so completely contradicts established behavioral and biological principles. Either we're missing something fundamental about coyote behavior, or something happened here that doesn't fit into conventional scientific frameworks. And given that this is Skinwalker Ranch, I'm inclined toward the latter explanation." His immediate recommendation was to conduct full necropsies on multiple specimens, test for toxins and disease, review all overnight security footage, and bring in additional experts with specialized knowledge in wildlife pathology. Because whatever had happened here, Taylor knew it was going to require expertise beyond his own to even begin understanding. Skinwalker Ranch maintains extensive security camera coverage, including multiple angles on the main entrance where the coyote pile was discovered. The overnight footage was immediately pulled and reviewed, and what it showed was as disturbing as the pile itself, because the cameras captured the coyotes arriving, but what they didn't capture was any clear cause of death. The footage begins at approximately 11:47 p.m. the previous night. The area under the ranch sign is empty, normal nighttime scene. Then at 11:52 p.m. the first coyote appears on camera, walking normally. No signs of distress or unusual behavior. It approaches the area beneath the sign and simply stops, stands there, completely still. Over the next 43 minutes, more coyotes arrive. They come from different directions, appearing at the edge of camera range and walking directly to the spot beneath the sign. Each one displays the same behavior: approach, stop, stand motionless. They don't interact with each other, don't show any signs of aggression or fear, just converge on this specific location and freeze. By 12:35 a.m., 43 coyotes are standing in a group beneath the ranch sign. The footage shows them all motionless, not pacing, not looking around, just standing in absolute stillness in a formation that's becoming increasingly organized and dense. Then, at 12:41 a.m., something happens that the review team watched repeatedly, trying to understand. All the coyotes collapse simultaneously, not gradually, not in sequence, all at once, as if someone had cut their strings. They drop to the ground in perfect synchronization. And here's what makes it impossible. There's no visible cause, no flash of light, no sound on the audio track, no object entering frame. They simply all fall at exactly the same moment. Dr. Travis Taylor analyzed this footage frame by frame. His observation: the synchronization is too perfect to be coincidental. We're talking about 43 individual animals dropping within the same half-second window. The probability of that happening randomly approaches zero. Something caused this, something that affected all of them simultaneously. And whatever it was, it's not visible on our camera systems. The footage continues for another 6 hours until dawn. During that entire time, nothing approaches the pile. No scavengers, no other coyotes, no wildlife at all. The area is completely avoided by every other animal species, as if they could sense something wrong with the location. That avoidance behavior continued for 3 days after the bodies were removed. But there's one more detail in the footage that investigators found deeply unsettling. At 3:17 a.m., approximately 3 hours after the coyotes collapsed, there's a brief electromagnetic interference spike on all camera feeds. The image pixelates for about 4 seconds. When the feeds clear, the coyote bodies have been rearranged into the neat pile that was discovered at dawn. Something moved 43 dead coyotes into an organized configuration during those 4 seconds of interference. And there's no visible evidence of what did the moving. 6 coyote carcasses were transported to a veterinary pathology facility in Salt Lake City for comprehensive necropsy. The team conducting the examinations included 2 board-certified veterinary pathologists and a wildlife disease specialist. They approached the autopsies expecting to find poisoning, disease, or some other identifiable cause of death. What they found instead was medical impossibility. The external examination revealed no trauma whatsoever. No wounds, no bruising, no broken bones, no signs of struggle. The animals appeared physically pristine, except for being dead. Internal examination showed all major organs present and, bizarrely, appearing normal. Heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, all looked healthy on gross examination. But tissue samples told a different story. Under microscopic examination, cells throughout the coyotes' bodies showed signs of catastrophic failure. Not gradual degradation like you'd see in disease or poisoning. Instant cellular death. As if every cell in their bodies had simultaneously stopped functioning. One pathologist described it as looking like the animals had been switched off at a cellular level. Toxicology screening found no poisons, no drugs, no environmental toxins. Blood chemistry was normal except for elevated stress hormones, suggesting the animals experienced extreme fear immediately before death. But there was no identifiable cause for that fear response, and stress alone doesn't cause instantaneous death in healthy animals. Dr. Travis Taylor attended the necropsy presentations and asked pointed questions about the cellular damage patterns. Could radiation cause this? Answer: no. The damage pattern was wrong and there was no radiation detected. Could electromagnetic pulse cause this? Answer: theoretically possible, but would require field strength that would have fried all the ranch's electronic equipment. Could sound frequency cause this? Answer: unlikely, and no unusual acoustic signatures were detected on the overnight recordings. The pathology team's official report concluded, cause of death cannot be determined through conventional veterinary pathology. The cellular damage observed is inconsistent with any known natural or man-made agent. This conclusion, essentially admitting that medical science couldn't explain how these animals died, was unprecedented in the pathologist's combined 40 years of experience. One additional finding troubled everyone involved. Brain tissue examination showed unusual activity patterns in the neurons, specifically in areas associated with fear response and motor control. The patterns suggested the animals had been experiencing intense terror and had simultaneously lost voluntary muscle control. They were conscious and terrified, but unable to flee, and then something killed them all at once. The mass coyote death triggered involvement from multiple government agencies. Utah Division of Wildlife Resources sent field investigators. The USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service dispatched disease specialists. Even the FBI's liaison for unusual incidents in federal territories made inquiries, given Skinwalker Ranch's proximity to restricted airspace and government installations. Wildlife officials initially suspected poisoning, possibly from illegal predator control efforts by neighboring ranchers, but field investigation found no evidence of bait stations, no toxins in soil samples, and testing of the carcasses ruled out all common and uncommon poisons. The hypothesis was quickly abandoned. Disease was the next avenue of investigation. The CDC was consulted about potential novel pathogens. Rabies, distemper, and other known wildlife diseases were ruled out through testing. The pathology findings of instant cellular death didn't match any known disease progression, and the fact that no other wildlife in the area showed any signs of illness eliminated epidemic explanations. Environmental factors were examined extensively. Electromagnetic anomalies, radiation, toxic gas seepage, infrasound. Every measurable environmental variable was tested, and nothing abnormal was detected except during that brief 4-second window of camera interference when the bodies were rearranged. And nothing abnormal was detected except during that brief 4-second window of camera interference when the bodies were rearranged. And that anomaly itself couldn't be characterized beyond electromagnetic disturbance of unknown origin. After 3 weeks of investigation, a confidential briefing was held involving representatives from multiple agencies and the Skinwalker Ranch research team. According to sources present at that meeting, the discussion became heated when conventional explanations were exhausted. The evidence pointed to something that standard investigative frameworks couldn't accommodate. The decision to label the incident as potentially paranormal in origin came from that meeting. Not an official public statement, but internal classification used in government documentation. The terminology used was anomalous mass mortality event with characteristics suggesting non-natural causation. In government bureaucracy, that phrasing is as close as agencies get to saying paranormal without using the word. Dr. Travis Taylor attended portions of that that briefing and later stated, "When federal investigators, people who approach everything from a position of scientific skepticism, start using language that essentially acknowledges paranormal possibilities, you know the evidence has forced them into uncomfortable territory. These aren't people who believe in ghosts or UFOs by default, but they looked at the data and couldn't provide conventional explanations." The official public statement from Utah Wildlife Resources was carefully worded, "We investigated a mass mortality event involving coyotes at a private property. Cause of death could not be definitively established. The incident appears to be isolated and does not pose risk to public health or other wildlife." That bland statement concealed the extraordinary reality of what investigators had found, or more accurately, what they'd failed to find any normal explanation for. The coyote incident wasn't the first mass animal event at Skinwalker Ranch, but it was the largest and best documented. The property has a history of cattle mutilations, mysterious livestock deaths, and wildlife behaving in impossible ways. But this incident, with 43 coyotes simultaneously dying for no determinable medical reason, represented a significant escalation in both scale and strangeness. Dr. Travis Taylor and the research team began comparing the coyote incident to previous animal-related phenomena at the ranch. Patterns emerged. The incidents tend to occur in specific areas of the property. They often happen during periods of increased electromagnetic activity. They frequently involve behavior that violates known animal psychology. Animals approaching locations they should instinctively avoid, showing no fear response when they should flee, converging in groups when they should be solitary. Previous cattle mutilations showed similar impossible characteristics: surgical precision without tool marks, complete blood drainage without evidence of how it was removed, organs extracted without disturbing surrounding tissue. The coyote pile represented a different manifestation of the same underlying pattern. Whatever affects this property can interact with living creatures in ways that violate biological and physical laws. Taylor developed a hypothesis, though he emphasized it was highly speculative. What if the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch can exert some kind of control over biological systems? Not just observation, which is what we see with the orbs and aerial phenomena, but actual influence over living things. The coyotes all arriving at the same location, standing motionless, dying simultaneously. That suggests external control at a neurological level. This hypothesis is disturbing because it implies intelligence and capability far beyond simple observation. If something at Skinwalker Ranch can compel animals to gather, paralyze them, kill them simultaneously, and then arrange their bodies, what does that mean for human safety? The ranch has had hundreds of visitors over the years. People work there daily. If the phenomena wanted to affect humans the way it apparently affected those coyotes, could it? Brandon Fugel, the ranch's owner, addressed this concern publicly. "We take safety extremely seriously. We have protocols. We monitor constantly, and we've never had a human injury related to paranormal activity. But I'll be honest, the coyote incident made us reconsider our understanding of what we're dealing with. This isn't just lights in the sky or equipment malfunctions. This is something that can affect living biology in profound ways." The pattern recognition extended beyond animal incidents. The electromagnetic interference that occurred when the coyote bodies were rearranged matched signatures from previous incidents where objects moved or equipment failed. The timing, always during overnight hours between midnight and 4 a.m., aligned with peak activity periods documented over years of monitoring. The location, directly beneath the ranch entrance sign, was symbolic in a way that suggested intentional messaging. Taylor's conclusion: whatever is happening at Skinwalker Ranch isn't random. It follows patterns. It seems to have preferences for certain locations and times. It responds to human presence and investigation. And critically, it appears to be escalating. The phenomena are becoming more dramatic, more frequent, and harder to dismiss as misidentification or equipment error. The coyote pile represents a threshold moment where denying intelligent causation becomes more difficult than accepting. When conventional explanations fail, speculation begins. Scientists, researchers, and paranormal investigators have proposed multiple theories about what could cause the type of mass mortality seen in the coyote incident. None are satisfying. All raise more questions than they answer. Theory 1. Advanced directed energy weapon. Some speculate that military testing of classified technology could explain the incident. A weapon system capable of targeting biological systems, inducing cardiac arrest or neurological shutdown from a distance. But this theory has problems. Why would military testing occur at a private ranch? Why would the government allow investigations if they were responsible? And what kind of weapon arranges bodies after killing? Theory 2. Electromagnetic anomaly of natural origin. Utah's geology includes unusual mineral deposits and underground formations that could theoretically produce electromagnetic effects. But Dr. Travis Taylor addressed this directly. We've surveyed this property extensively with ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic sensors. Yes, there are geological features. No, none of them explain synchronized biological shutdown of 43 animals. Natural EM fields don't work that way. Theory 3. Infrasound or ultrasound frequencies. Certain sound frequencies can affect animal behavior and potentially induce fear or disorientation. Some researchers propose that underground geological activity or equipment malfunction could have produced frequencies that affected the coyotes, but acoustic analysis of the overnight recordings showed no unusual sound signatures, and sound frequency doesn't explain the pile arrangement. Theory 4. Paranormal entity or intelligence. This is where the speculation becomes uncomfortable for scientifically minded researchers. The theory suggests that Skinwalker Ranch is inhabited by or attracts some form of non-human intelligence capable of affecting physical reality. The coyotes were compelled to gather, paralyzed through unknown means, killed simultaneously, and their bodies arranged as either a message or a territorial display. Dr. Travis Taylor, when pressed on which theory he found most plausible, gave a careful response. I'm a scientist. I deal in evidence and testable hypotheses, but I'm also honest about what the evidence shows. We have documented phenomena that don't fit conventional frameworks. The electromagnetic signatures, the synchronized biological effects, the apparent intelligence behind the arrangement. All of this points to something we don't understand operating by rules we haven't discovered. Whether you call that paranormal or just extremely advanced unknown technology, the practical result is the same. We're dealing with something beyond current scientific explanation. Theory 5. Interdimensional or quantum effects. Some physicists consulting on Skinwalker Ranch investigations have proposed that the property might be experiencing effects from quantum phenomena or even interdimensional bleed-through. This theory suggests that what we perceive as paranormal activity is actually natural physics, operating at scales or in ways we don't yet understand. The coyotes might have been affected by localized alterations in space-time or quantum field fluctuations. Each theory attempts to bridge the gap between documented evidence and possible explanation, but they all share a common problem. They require accepting that something extraordinary is occurring. Whether it's classified military technology, unknown natural phenomena, non-human intelligence, or exotic physics, any explanation for the coyote incident forces us to acknowledge that our understanding of reality is incomplete. And for most people, that's more disturbing than any specific theory.
Beneath the rugged terrain of Skinwalker Ranch lies a cabin investigators were never meant to find. A weather-beaten patrol shelter used by the ranch's head of security, known only as Dragon, has now been exposed as far more than a rest stop. What began as a routine patrol post unraveled into a classified containment chamber tied to decades-old psychological studies. What they dug up forced internal security to seal the site, possibly forever. Tonight, we uncover the truth hidden beneath the floorboards and why Dragon may have never been the guard. He was the test subject. Long before anyone on the current research team even knew it existed, the patrol cabin now associated with Dragon sat half-buried in silence at the farthest edge of Skinwalker Ranch. From a distance, it looked harmless, a faded structure with weather-beaten boards, a sagging corrugated roof, and a door that creaked in the wind like any forgotten storage shed meant for emergency supplies or feed sacks. Most new arrivals barely glanced at it. A building like that makes sense on a ranch often battered by storms. It blended in like a scar that time simply stopped noticing. But the silence surrounding it was louder than the wind that rattled its walls. The first sign something was off didn't come from inside, but from above. Years later, when aerial mapping was done for site monitoring, analysts noticed the cabin didn't appear on any historical construction record. No listing, no permits, no maintenance logs, nothing in prior land development files matched its presence. It was as if it wasn't supposed to be there. At first, staff assumed it had been added during the previous ownership transition. But when deeper archives were pulled, government land surveys from decades before showed that exact spot marked as Restricted Research Point, even before Skinwalker Ranch became public. Meaning, the cabin wasn't built where it made sense. It was built where something was already waiting. Satellite scans then revealed a second anomaly. The building's coordinates fell within a classified sensor monitoring zone, one that hadn't been disclosed during acquisition. Yet, no external power lines connected to it, no communications relay, nothing that explained why the site was flagged. Internal employees later admitted they ignored it at first because some locations on the ranch are better left undocumented. But that changed the day Dragon was assigned there, not to protect what was inside, but to unknowingly interact with it. Because someone, somewhere, already knew that the cabin was never meant to serve people. It was meant to study them. When investigators finally entered the cabin with full structural clearance, their first observation was confusion. Ranch buildings are typically assembled with utility in mind: straight beams, salvaged lumber, visible nails, basic insulation. This cabin followed none of those conventions. The interior dimensions measured nearly 3 feet larger than the external foundation, an impossibility without intentionally engineered manipulation. Nails were embedded in spiral configurations rather than linear framing, indicating repeated internal reconstruction, not to repair weather damage, but to modify chamber layout. Someone had rebuilt parts of it from the inside many times, not due to decay, but precision. Underneath the rotting floorboards, something far more alarming emerged: industrial-grade electromagnetic grounding plates, the kind used in classified laboratory environments designed to prevent external signal interference or contamination of energy readings. These plates weren't just installed, they were anchored above soil that appeared chemically sterilized. Multiple layers of metallic shielding were positioned to block frequencies rather than protect from weather. No ranch utility shed would ever require that level of electromagnetic suppression. In fact, it shouldn't even be possible to install such technology that deep without formal contracting, heavy machinery, and recorded power logistics. Yet no construction files existed, no record of delivery trucks, no engineering correspondences, nothing. Environmental sensors inside the cabin displayed temperature fluctuations in exact 5-degree increments at scheduled intervals, regulated with precision akin to controlled lab testing. Dust drifted abnormally, collecting only on surfaces away from hidden sensor alignments. Even the air felt unnaturally dense, as though designed to transmit static memory rather than store humidity. According to sensory log reconstruction, the space behaved less like shelter and more like an active test chamber tuned to interact with living cognitive presence. When the engineering blueprints surfaced through partial digital recovery, the reality became undeniable. The cabin was not built to protect staff from ranch phenomena. It was built to maintain sustained exposure to it. A passive observation box, manipulated to seem harmless, yet designed like a waiting trap with layered influence circuitry embedded into every board and beam. The real question wasn't how it was built without anyone noticing. It was who approved constructing a psychological exposure chamber disguised as a ranch shack. Dragon officially joined the security division, believing his role was standard: monitoring restricted zones, tracking perimeter breaches, deterring trespassers. On paper, his assignment seemed logical. In reality, he had been marked for this role years earlier. Data reconstruction from decrypted research archives revealed that his employment file overlapped with psychological compatibility assessments from a retired Cold War behavioral project. Traits flagged as ideal for long-term exposure testing: emotional restraint, high observational focus, strict adherence to routine, minimal reactive behavior, were identical to what his recruitment form highlighted as professional strengths. This match was not accidental. He fit a pre-established test subject profile. Internal logs recovered beneath the cabin listed those traits under a column labeled Subject Stability Threshold, Phase 3, Qualification. His name never appeared in full. Instead, his initials were cross-referenced next to coded reference strings, suggesting he was evaluated long before he stepped onto the property. What he believed was a standard security screening actually mirrored historical psychological trial formatting from classified personnel conditioning program. Investigators reviewing this alignment stated that he was not hired because he was well suited for security. He was placed because he was suited for influence induction. As months passed, changes in Dragon's personal logbook began reflecting subtle cognitive interference. Entries transitioned from precise, professionally structured reports to fragmented expressions of discomfort, short thoughts, incomplete sentences, increased emotional weight without clear trigger. In isolated recordings, he described sensing shifts in his mood and physical energy when near the cabin. He began noting feelings of being observed without environmental stimuli, unsure whether the pressure came from the land or something within his mind. His handwriting became uneven in extended shifts, aligning with what earlier documents classified as optimal affective disorientation patterns. What makes Dragon's case uniquely tragic is that he never volunteered for any experiment. He never even knew one was occurring. When researchers finally gained system-level clearance to investigate beneath Dragon's patrol cabin, they assumed they'd uncover forgotten wiring, weather damage, or perhaps improperly stored supplies. Instead, lifting the warped floorboards revealed something that did not resemble standard construction at all. A rectangular panel sat embedded deeper than typical foundation depth, sealed with cold industrial bolts that matched no commercial ranch hardware. The bolts were consistent with those used on sealed transport cases for classified laboratory assets, designed to survive high pressure, intense heat, and electromagnetic fluctuation. The panel led to a reinforced metal compartment professionally fabricated and insulated. This was not a repair zone. It was an installation. Inside lay an evidence-style containment tray, organized with the precision of a forensic archive. Each item had been methodically placed, not casually stored. Thick, tinted evidence vials were labeled with non-standard identifiers like ANOMA, ANOMC, and Refuse Human Study. No dates, no signature field, just lettering consistent with internal cataloging codes used in discontinued research programs marked high-risk biocontainment. Next to the vials sat a folded Kevlar pad bearing dried stains. Surface samples returned structure patterns inconsistent with human or registered wildlife blood. Machine analysis flagged the material as unclassified biological origin. Bone fragments were also found, smooth, unnaturally dense, chemically resistant, and slightly luminous under infrared spectrum scanning. The size was too small for any known large fauna, yet density scan suggested impact resistance beyond normal evolutionary design. The final layer contained a microfilm envelope labeled Echo Gateway Failure Report. Its contents detailed electromagnetic exposure testing, cognitive response analytics, and radiation pattern tracking. The last page read, "Subject destabilized, threshold exceeded, terminate field sequence." When researchers found Dragon's personal logbook buried deep inside his patrol bag, they expected routine entries, weather updates, ranch security checks, gate scans. What they uncovered instead was the slow unraveling of a man who believed he was simply guarding property, unaware he was the one being studied. Early pages appeared normal: neat handwriting, precise notes on trail status, and motion sensor activation times. But midway through the journal, the tone shifted. Sentences grew shorter, words broke apart, handwriting slanted unevenly as if written with a shaking hand. And then, the timestamps began contradicting themselves. Several entries repeated the exact same minute, but described different emotional states each time. One line read, 0317, felt normal. The next, 0317, pressure behind eyes, like something pushing thoughts into place. Some timestamps were marked days into the future, others looping backwards, mirroring what was later discovered in the compromised security footage. It was as if time inside Dragon's memory didn't follow the outside world. More disturbing were the margin notes. They looked like medical-style observations, written in smaller, more controlled script, as if someone else had added them later. But forensic analysis confirmed it was Dragon's handwriting, only written while his brain was under intense stress. The notes referenced forced cognitive shifting, emotional override, recall disruption patterns. At first, investigators thought he was documenting symptoms. Later, they realized he was mirroring language found in the microfilm experiments beneath the cabin. One passage stopped the review team cold. Something watches from inside inside the walls, not with eyes. It waits for me to react before it does. I dream of walking away, but wake up standing in the doorway. The breakthrough came when analysts overlaid Dragon's emotional peaks, recorded in his logbook, with electrical and energy fluctuation reports from devices installed unknowingly inside the cabin wall. What the team discovered still causes silence whenever it's mentioned in internal briefing. Each time Dragon documented a spike in stress, confusion, or sudden emotional collapse, the structural monitoring systems registered sharp electromagnetic surges at the exact same timestamp, down to the second. This meant the environment was not only reacting to him, it appeared to be tracking his mental state in real time. Archived data from the recovered files showed layout diagrams of the cabin labeled Anchor Zone, Cognitive Trigger Line, and Exposure Conduit. These were not ordinary structural markers. They matched terms used during classified Cold War field research involving prolonged isolation and interaction with non-standard environmental stimuli. The cabin, according to these blueprints, wasn't intended to protect him. It was built to encourage contact with an unseen influence. Further review found audio interference synchronized with Dragon's log entries. In recordings captured during his patrols, low-frequency pulses appeared intermittently whenever he expressed heightened fear in writing. Special sound analysis revealed nearly inaudible human-like resonance waves layered beneath the low hum. When separated digitally, these pulses formed rhythm patterns resembling neural response triggers used in cognitive field tests. That meant whatever was affecting him wasn't random. It was behaving as though it was responding. But the most alarming finding wasn't found in audio or electrical logs. It came from thermal mapping scans conducted months after his final entry. The scans revealed a consistent temperature dip, exactly 5 degrees, for 7-minute intervals, matching the precision of Dragon's behavior shifts mentioned in his journal. Exact timing, exact change, every single day. What the team uncovered next was something that had never been discussed on camera, not during official briefings, not even behind closed doors on the ranch. When experts finally processed the microfilm labeled Echo Gateway Failure Report, the contents shattered any remaining assumption that Dragon was merely the first person affected. It revealed there was a previous subject, someone who was never supposed to be mentioned again. The report, dated decades earlier, described an experimental phase that took place long before Skinwalker Ranch became known to the public. The subject was placed in a structure almost identical to Dragon's cabin. Same electromagnetic grid layout, same internal dimensions, same proximity to the anomaly. But unlike Dragon, that individual was not monitored openly. They were monitored remotely. And according to the final line of the failure report, contact escalation exceeded psychological tolerance threshold, resulting in systemic collapse. Nowhere did it mention a rescue attempt. Even more disturbing, temperature logs, behavioral field responses, and radiation interference patterns from that abandoned test perfectly mirrored Dragon's data nearly 40 years later. This implied that whatever force was interacting with him didn't just recognize the setup, it remembered it. It was behaving as if the experiment had restarted. Handwritten in the margin of one microfilm page were the words, "Pattern persists. Entity preference indicates continuity." That simple phrase terrified analysts. It meant what was being studied might not be reacting randomly. It was showing recognition. And then, just beneath that phrase, a final note in faded ink. Subject history must remain undisclosed. Current anchor unaware of precedent. The discovery of the envelope marked "If I don't come back" shifted the entire investigation from scientific analysis into something deeply personal and terrifying. It was not stored inside the locker, where evidence was meant to be kept. Instead, it was hidden behind a thin wooden panel near the back wall, like someone wanted it to remain secret unless things reached a point where returning was no longer an option. The message inside was short, written in Jason Dragon's own handwriting, but it read like the words of someone who no longer trusted his thoughts. He didn't speak about threats the way investigators expected. He didn't refer to a creature or a presence or even a direct danger. Instead, his message described a shift inside himself. He wrote that he began waking up in the cabin without remembering ever lying down. He felt emotional responses that did not match what he was thinking. and most chilling, he believed something was trying to learn through him. He described moments where he felt drawn back toward the cabin after leaving, like his instincts had been reprogrammed. At one point he wrote, "When my mind goes quiet, I feel it try to speak through the silence." That sentence alone broke several researchers emotionally. Next to the note was a small folded photo. It showed Dragon standing outside the cabin during normal patrol, appearing calm and focused. But what was handwritten on the back made experts question whether the person in the picture was even the same man who wrote the letter. The words read, "This is me," before the cabin noticed. The note ended with one final warning, left like a desperate instruction. Do not enter alone. The cabin does not forget who it watches. The final breakthrough came not from letters or hidden compartments, but from the last working camera pointed at the patrol cabin. At first glance, the recordings appeared normal. Quiet nights, still wind, empty ground. But just days before Dragon stopped showing up to work, the footage began displaying anomalies that experts still cannot explain. Time didn't move forward or backward. It began replaying itself differently. A minute of footage would play, then rewind, then repeat. But each time, tiny changes appeared. A rock that had been on one side of the frame would shift inches, even feet, without any visible movement. Tree branches bent at angles differing between loops. In one sequence, the cabin appeared wider than before, and then narrower in the next loop, despite never physically changing. The strangest clip showed a metal toolbox near the entrance, a toolbox that, according to team logs, was not placed there until 3 days after the timestamp on the recording. It was labeled as reverse time footage, reality recorded from the future. When researchers slowed the footage frame by frame, they noticed faint flashes along the screen edges, not camera glare, not insects, and not weather interference. The shapes matched the symbols found in the microfilm labeled Echo Gateway Failure Report, almost like whatever this was, it was trying to communicate. Soon after, things escalated. In one recording, the shadow of the camera pole began to fade until it disappeared altogether, even though the real pole was still standing outside. Then the entire image turned black. No error codes, no static, no signal loss, just silence. Over the next 24 hours, every camera facing the cabin stopped working the same way. Not because the devices broke, because something stopped allowing them to see. The decision was made to seal the cabin permanently. Dragon avoided interviews. The team locked the evidence, and Skinwalker Ranch quietly marked the area as restricted. Something strange is happening at Skinwalker Ranch, and tonight, its owner, Brandon Fugel, is finally breaking the silence. For years, the world has watched unexplained lights, radiation spikes, and technology failures play out on television. But now, Brandon claims the public hasn't seen even half of what's really going on. In a sudden announcement, he reveals new evidence, government pressure, and a discovery beneath the mesa that changes everything we thought we knew about the ranch. And if what he's saying is true, then someone has been trying to keep this hidden for a very long time. Subscribe, because this story is just beginning. When Brandon Fugel agreed to a late-night interview on a small independent live stream channel, nobody expected anything unusual. He'd done hundreds of interviews over the years, always measured, always careful, always respectful of non-disclosure agreements. But on this night, something was different. His voice was tense, his posture stiff, and behind him, viewers noticed something unsettling. The blinds in his office were pulled shut, and 2 security guards stood just barely visible in the reflection of the glass. Before the host could finish asking the first question, Brandon leaned forward and interrupted. "There are things happening on the ranch we were never meant to understand," he said. His tone carried none of the scientific detachment he'd become known for. "And we've been told to stop digging." Literally, chat messages exploded across the screen. More than 80,000 people tuned in within minutes. Brandon then recounted an event from earlier that month, an excavation near the southern ridge of the mesa. The team had noticed recurring spikes of ionizing radiation, the same kind that had hospitalized crew members in previous seasons. But this time, there was something else. A geometric pattern carved into stone 8 feet below the surface. It wasn't modern tool work, it wasn't erosion, it had symmetry. He paused, swallowing hard. We transmitted the data to one of our government consultants. They told us to close the site immediately and destroy the documentation. The host blinked in disbelief. Brandon continued. When we refused, 3 unmarked helicopters flew over the ranch. No transponders, no flight plans. That's not paranoia, that's a violation. He lifted his phone and held it toward the camera. On the screen was a blurry image, a perfectly smooth circular cavity beneath the mesa, surrounded by smaller chambers. We scanned this cavern. Something metallic is inside, he whispered. The audience went silent. Then he dropped the sentence that would trend worldwide within hours. We didn't discover it. Something placed it there. For the first time, Brandon wasn't smiling. He wasn't selling a mystery. He was warning us. In the days following that interview, speculation spread across the internet, but nothing compared to the information Brandon quietly shared with his research team behind closed doors. The object beneath the mesa wasn't just metallic. According to preliminary scans, its alloy composition didn't match any known industrial signature. It reflected electromagnetic pulses in a way that suggested it was designed to be found, but not easily understood. The team scheduled a controlled descent into the cavern. When technicians lowered sensors through a stabilized borehole, the instruments behaved erratically. Cameras glitched, thermal readings inverted from cold to blistering heat in seconds. And for a brief moment, a deep humming vibration rattled the equipment. One of the monitors, usually full of static, flashed a smooth outline, like a sphere inside a cradle. Then, everything went dark. Brandon ordered all gear retrieved immediately. One technician who had been tethered near the borehole surface complained of dizziness. Within hours, his skin reddened and his hair began to fall out in patches. Radiation sickness again, but this time faster, sharper. Unlike any profile the medical team recognized, the object wasn't dormant, it was interacting. That evening, Brandon contacted a federal liaison he'd worked with since the ranch went public. The response was curt: cease all penetration of the mesa and await further instruction. Hours later, the ranch's perimeter sensors detected movement. 2 unmarked SUVs idling near the property line. The drivers remained inside, headlights off, cameras pointed toward the gate. As word spread among the staff, fear took root. This wasn't like the usual UFO sightings or cattle anomalies. This was tactical interest. Someone, somewhere, knew exactly what lay under that stone. We're not supposed to be digging here, Brandon told his lead physicist. But if we walk away now, we may never know who built it or why it's responding. That night, as the team reviewed the corrupted footage frame by frame, they noticed something impossible. During the static blur, the sphere appeared to move, not physically rolling, but shifting orientation, like an eye turning toward a sound. The room fell silent. For the first time, Brandon wondered if the ranch wasn't protecting a secret, but guarding humanity from it. Within 48 hours of the failed borehole scan, Brandon's inbox filled with messages from agencies he'd never directly interacted with before. They weren't threats, at least not on paper. Instead, they were offers, grants, funding opportunities, partnership programs, all designed to shift control of the research to federal oversight. Every document had the same concerning clause: full custody of all recovered materials. Brandon refused them all. That's when the phones started acting strange. Calls dropped mid-sentence. Texts arrived hours late. Ranch servers logged intrusion attempts from encrypted networks bouncing across continents. "Someone's probing our systems," their cybersecurity consultant muttered, tapping through logs with shaking hands. "They're not learning who we are. They're learning where we're weakest." Meanwhile, activity on the ranch intensified. At 2:13 a.m., motion sensors positioned along the northern fence triggered repeatedly. When security cameras rotated toward the alert, they captured figures, 3 of them, standing perfectly still beyond the property line. Their height, posture, and proportions looked wrong, too stiff, too symmetrical. After 15 seconds, they vanished behind a flash of static. The next morning, Brandon gathered his senior team. He played the footage without commentary. No one spoke. "We're being watched," astrophysicist Travis Taylor finally murmured, "and not just by people." Then came the seismic data. Sensors embedded across the mesa began detecting rhythmic pulses deep underground, consistent, timed vibrations occurring every 6 minutes. They weren't earthquakes, they were signals. When Brandon forwarded the readouts to a classified contact, the reply was chillingly short. "Stop transmitting data." Around this time, rumors began circulating among staff. Stories of ranch workers hearing voices echoing from the cavern during late-night spot checks. Whispers that seemed to speak directly into the mind without air or breath. A geologist reported feeling pressure in his skull, as if his thoughts were being pulled downward toward the mesa. He resigned the next morning. Brandon doubled security, but physical guards couldn't protect against what was happening next. The dreams. Nearly half the crew began waking in the night, sweating, claiming they'd seen a dark chamber with a sphere suspended in a pale blue glow. They described the same faint hum, the same vibration captured by instruments days earlier. Identical nightmares, shared imagery. "I've seen pattern correlation before," Brandon said quietly, pacing the command room, "but I've never seen shared cognition. Something is interacting with us, and it's choosing who." More than ever, the ranch felt alive, like it was studying them back. Behind the mesa, something hidden for centuries was stirring, and the world, without knowing it, was inching closer to awakening it fully. 3 days after the seismic pulses began, the ranch's airspace, normally quiet, became unusually active. Radar picked up a small aircraft circling the mesa at low altitude. It wasn't military, but it wasn't commercial either. The pilot ignored every attempt at radio contact. As Brandon and his security chief watched the feed, the plane banked sharply and descended. Cameras mounted on its underside aimed directly at the excavation site. Within seconds, alarms blared. The ranch's monitoring system detected a sudden spike in microwave radiation emanating from the cavern. The sphere beneath the mesa was reacting to the aircraft's presence. Then, without warning, the plane's lights flickered. Its engine cut out mid-air, and the craft drifted in a slow, controlled spiral before crashing safely into a field 2 miles away. No fire, no explosion. It was as if something guided it down. Federal vehicles arrived on scene before Brandon's team could reach the wreck. Agents sealed the site and confiscated all equipment. The pilot was escorted into an unmarked van and driven away. When Brandon pressed for information, he was told only that aviation protocols had been violated. No further explanation. The next morning, new signs appeared around the perimeter. Restricted Flight Zone, Federal Authority. Brandon hadn't requested them. The FAA claimed it was for wildlife preservation. But wildlife doesn't ground planes. That night, ranch instruments caught a faint electromagnetic whisper pulsing from the mesa toward the crash site, a signal too orderly to be natural. Someone or something was communicating, and for the first time, Brandon feared the message wasn't meant for humans at all. The following week tested the ranch more than any single phenomenon ever had. The crew, normally tight-knit and resilient, began to fracture under the strain of sleepless nights, whispering voices, and unexplained health issues. Tempers flared during simple discussions, and arguments erupted over equipment placement, lab access, even meal schedules. Everyone felt it. Something was pushing them. Travis reviewed biometric data from wearable sensors the team had been testing. Heart rates were spiking at random intervals, usually when staff passed directly above the cavern area. Brainwave scans showed brief bursts of activity in regions associated with fear response and dream recall. Whatever lay beneath the mesa wasn't just emitting radiation, it was interacting neurologically. Then there were the compass failures. Every analog compass on the ranch began drifting, pulling toward the same direction, the excavation site. Digital sensors mirrored the anomaly anomaly, suggesting a magnetic field shift underground. When geologists tried to model the readings, the simulation showed an impossible shape, like a rotating torus of magnetism forming a containment shell. During a closed-door meeting, Brandon addressed the team. "The ranch has always been strange," he said, "but this is targeted. It's influencing biology, psychology, and magnetism at the same time. Something wants to be noticed." One researcher abruptly stood. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. "Or it wants to be left alone," she murmured. She left mid-meeting, packed her belongings, and drove away without waiting for her paycheck. As tensions grew, Brandon's trusted ranch manager quietly admitted something odd. Livestock near the mesa had stopped grazing and stood facing the rock formation for hours at a time, staring without blinking, like they were listening. Sleep deprivation hit next. Crew members reported jolting awake at exactly 3:11 a.m. every night. Security logs confirmed it. Motion cameras around the mesa pulsed with static at that exact time, down to the second. "You're all on edge," the government liaison said during a call. "Shut the site down." But when Brandon asked if the government had seen similar patterns elsewhere, the line went silent for a long, uneasy moment before the call disconnected. Late that same night, the ranch's surveillance tower detected movement on the mesa. In infrared, several humanoid heat signatures stood in a semicircle, facing the excavation. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. Their heat signatures weren't biological at all, more like faint electromagnetic outlines. When security teams approached, the figures faded into the rock itself. The next morning, Brandon made an announcement that stunned the crew. Despite escalating danger, despite government warnings, they would continue. "The world doesn't get smaller when you ignore it," he said. "It just gets darker." The team nodded quietly, but no one looked reassured. Whatever was buried beneath the mesa was changing them, and now the ranch itself seemed to be choosing sides. By the end of the week, the rhythmic seismic pulses had evolved into something more complex. The waveform was no longer a simple beat. It now fluctuated in patterns that resembled data transmission. When the team converted the frequencies into audible range, a low, trembling hum filled the command center. It wasn't random. It rose, fell, and paused with eerie precision, like a message waiting for a response. Their signal analyst isolated the pattern and compared it to Earth-based communications. The spacing didn't match radio chatter, Morse, or sonar, but one thing stood out. The pulses repeated every 42 minutes. Exactly. Nothing in nature keeps time that perfectly. Worse, the pulses intensified whenever a human approached the excavation site. Heart monitors spiked. EEG sensors lit up. It was reacting to proximity, almost like curiosity. One night, around 3:11 a.m., the same minute the crew kept waking, the sensors detected a new anomaly, a faint ticking sound beneath the stone. It resembled metal expanding under heat, but the temperature readings were unchanged. Brandon and his physicist exchanged glances. "It's adjusting," she whispered. The next morning, they attempted to respond by broadcasting a controlled tone back into the cavern. For a moment, the seismic pulses stopped completely. The ranch fell eerily silent. Cameras froze. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the sphere answered. The return pulse surged with enough force to fry 2 servers and leave every screen flooded with black and white static. Embedded deep in the noise, someone caught a fragment of pattern. 6 repeating symbols outlined in geometric arcs. It wasn't language as we know it, but neither was it meaningless. As Brandon stared at the frozen frame, a chill ran across his shoulders. Whatever was down there wasn't just emitting signals, it was listening and learning. With the pulses escalating, Brandon authorized a second borehole, this time with a fiber optic camera small enough to slip through a crack in the stone chamber wall. The drill descended slowly, guided by precise telemetry, until it reached a hollow pocket beneath the mesa. The feed flickered to life. At first, all they saw was darkness. Then, the camera auto-focused, and the chamber walls came into view. They were perfectly smooth, curved, and reflective, not like cave stone, but like polished alloy. Stranger still, the surfaces were etched with repeating hexagonal patterns, each glowing faintly with a pale blue phosphorescence. As the camera panned downward, the sphere appeared in the center of the chamber, suspended several inches off the floor. It hovered in silent defiance of gravity, rotating just enough to reveal engraved arcs that resembled orbital paths. Every rotation caused the chamber walls to pulse gently, as though in resonance. Suddenly, the live feed jittered. The camera lens fogged from the inside, as if something unseen exhaled. In the control room, temperature sensors spiked plus 10 degrees in seconds. Alarms screamed. Then they heard it. A whisper. It wasn't electronic interference or wind. It was a layered voice. 3 tones speaking simultaneously, forming no recognizable word. Yet every person felt instinctively that it was directed at them. One technician stumbled backward, clutching his chest as if gripped by panic. Another dropped to his knees, hands over his ears, though no external sound registered. The feed snapped to white static. When the screen stabilized, the sphere's blue glow had intensified. The walls now rippled with shifting patterns, reacting like a living membrane. The camera began to melt, literally, its metal casing dripping as if exposed to intense heat, though thermals recorded only mild warmth. Brandon ordered the drill retracted immediately. For the rest of the night, the chamber emitted a slow, rhythmic flash, visible through cracks in the mesa. It pulsed like a heartbeat. For the first time, the team realized something terrifying. They hadn't discovered an artifact. They had awakened a system. Shaken by the chamber's reaction, Brandon halted all drilling operations and ordered a full electromagnetic sweep of the ranch. That's when the readings spiked again, except this time they didn't originate underground. 3 distinct signals were detected hovering above the mesa, triangular in formation, only visible on specialized radar. Cameras pointed skyward captured nothing but an empty blue sky. Yet, the instruments screamed. When the team tried powering down certain sensors to reduce interference, something responded. Every device rebooted on its own. Tablets flashed unauthorized logins. Security gates opened and closed without input. It was as if the ranch's systems were being tested. Suddenly, the same whispering tone from the chamber returned, but now, through the radio array, layered voices speaking in modulation patterns. Dr. Taylor noted they resembled pulsed star maps. The pulses grew faster the longer the equipment remained disabled, like a warning. When power was restored, the signals faded. The implication was chilling. Whatever was underground did not want to be isolated. That night, ranch animals refused to approach the mesa. Camera traps showed their silhouettes pausing, staring into darkness, then backing away. The sphere beneath the rock chamber dimmed, as if going dormant. Brandon realized shutting everything down only provoked a reaction. Observing, not interfering, might be the only safe path. But then, something happened that forced his hand. At 3:14 a.m., the underground sensors activated on their own. The chamber pulsed bright enough to illuminate cracks in the mesa, visible from the valley below. Brandon knew secrecy was no longer possible, and so, in a controlled interview the next morning, he made his announcement. "We've confirmed a non-human technology below Skinwalker Ranch. For the safety of the public, we're no longer calling this a legend, we're calling it evidence." The world froze, and the ranch hummed quietly, as if listening.
New details have surfaced about what Bryant "Dragon" Arnold's life has become since his sudden disappearance from the secret of Skinwalker Ranch, and what insiders are now revealing is far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. For 3 seasons, Dragon stood as the ranch's protector, its enforcer, the man who guarded the boundary between our world and whatever waited beyond it. But something happened to him out there, something that didn't just push him away from the cameras, something that followed him home. Tonight, we uncover the tragic reality of Dragon's life after Skinwalker Ranch, and why those who knew him say he's never been the same. The ranch didn't just change Dragon, it marked him, and according to people close to the situation, that mark has become a curse he can't escape. What you're about to hear goes beyond anything shown on television. This is the story of a man who dedicated everything to protecting others from the unknown, only to become its primary target. From unexplained encounters that were never filmed, to the psychological breakdown that forced him to walk away, to the haunting reality of his life today. Dragon's story is a warning about what happens when you stare too long into the abyss, and the abyss decides to stare back. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. Bryant Arnold wasn't supposed to disappear. He was the kind of man who seemed permanent, rooted to the land like the mesa itself. For years, he was more than just security. He was the last line line of defense, the one person Brandon Fugel trusted above all others to keep the ranch secure. Dragon didn't just protect the property from trespassers or curious tourists. He protected the world from what lived beneath that cursed ground. His presence alone was a deterrent, not just to people, but to whatever forces seemed to pulse through that valley. But in the spring of his final season, something fundamental changed. The crew noticed it first. Dragon stopped engaging in casual conversation. He avoided the command center unless absolutely necessary. He triple-checked locks on doors that had never needed checking before. His patrols became longer, more erratic, as if he was searching for something or running from something he couldn't name. And then one morning, without any warning or explanation, he drove off the property and never came back. No press release, no farewell episode, no official statement, just gone. What most people don't know is that Dragon didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because staying meant losing himself completely, surrendering to something that had been circling him for years. And according to those close to him, that surrender is exactly what's happening now. The man who once seemed unshakable has become a shadow of his former self, haunted by experiences that refuse to stay buried. Dragon's disappearance wasn't an ending. It was an escape attempt, and tragically, it didn't work. Dragon's unraveling didn't start when the cameras were rolling. It started years before, during his earliest patrols on the ranch, long before the show ever aired. Back then, he reported strange disturbances to Brandon Fugel, things he couldn't easily explain or rationalize, lights that moved against the wind direction, shadows that stretched impossibly long across the ground at noon, cold spots that appeared without warning in the middle of summer heat. And one night, alone on the West Ridge during a routine patrol, he saw it for the first time, a shimmering distortion hovering several feet above the ground, twisting the air around it like heat rising from asphalt on a scorching day. But the temperature wasn't hot, it was freezing cold. Dragon froze in place. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't radio for help. He didn't move at all. He just stood there in the darkness, watching as the thing watched him back. There was an intelligence to it, a presence that felt aware and calculating. Then, without warning, it vanished. Not faded gradually, not drifted away. It simply ceased to exist, like someone had flipped a switch and removed it from reality. Dragon never filed an official report about the incident, never told the scientists what he'd witnessed, never mentioned it on camera or in any interview. But from that night forward, he carried himself differently, like a man who knew he'd been marked, tagged, chosen for something he couldn't yet understand. And as the years passed and the show began filming, Dragon realized with growing dread that he was right. Whatever had watched him that night on the West Ridge hadn't forgotten him. It was waiting, observing, planning its next move. The moment that truly began pulling Dragon away from the show happened late one night near the south fence line. During what should have been a routine perimeter check, Dragon was walking the property with two crew members after strange radio interference spiked across every channel simultaneously. They expected to find trespassers, maybe teenagers trying to sneak onto the property, or perhaps just an equipment malfunction. Instead, the temperature dropped so hard and so fast that all three men's breath hung thick in the air like dense fog. Even the insects stopped making sound. The silence was oppressive, unnatural, wrong. That's when Dragon noticed it. A tall figure standing motionless on the ridge, silhouetted against the night sky, backlit by nothing but pale moonlight. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, his mind filling in patterns where none existed. Then it moved, not like a human being, not like any animal he'd ever tracked. It shifted sideways across the ground without taking a single step, gliding as if the laws of physics didn't apply to it. One of the camera operators whispered urgently, "What the hell is that?" But Dragon didn't answer. His hand hovered over his sidearm, not drawing the weapon, just bracing himself for whatever might come next. The figure paused at the base of the mesa slope, seeming to regard them with invisible eyes. Then it vanished, not walked away into the darkness, not ran. It simply blinked out of existence like a light being switched off. Dragon stepped forward slowly, almost against his will, as if pulled by a force he couldn't explain or resist. He scanned the ridge methodically, ordered the others to fall back to a safe distance, and attempted to radio base. But the radio shrieked with a metallic warping noise that made both men cover their ears in pain. After the interference finally cleared, Dragon spoke only 2 words into the radio. "Shut it down!" The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened, but everyone on the crew noticed the fundamental change in him. He stared at the mesa longer during his patrol. He stopped joking with the camera crew, and something deep inside him had shifted permanently. Several weeks after the ridge encounter, Dragon was working late, reviewing drone footage alone in the command trailer, what he used to call his safe place. Nothing strange ever happened in that trailer. No cold spots, no no equipment failures, no unexplained shadows. It was the one building on the entire property that everyone trusted implicitly. But one night, shortly after midnight, as Dragon sat reviewing surveillance footage in complete solitude, every monitor in front of him froze simultaneously on the exact same frame, a frame that by all logic shouldn't have existed. On every screen, from every camera angle throughout the property, the footage showed the exact same impossible image, a silhouette standing directly behind Dragon inside the trailer, only a few feet from where he currently sat. It wasn't tall or monstrous in the traditional sense, but the proportions were fundamentally wrong, too long, too narrow. The angles bent unnaturally, like something was wearing the shape of a human being, didn't understand how to properly fit inside it. Dragon spun around instantly, hand reaching for his weapon, every muscle tensed for confrontation, but nothing was there. The space behind him was completely empty, yet the air in that spot was ice cold, almost wet, like he'd suddenly opened a freezer door in a humid room. The monitors flickered erratically. The silhouette disappeared from the screen. Then, one by one in sequence, each screen began replaying the last 2 seconds of footage backward without any input from Dragon whatsoever. He hit keys frantically, slammed the power button repeatedly, physically yanked cables from their connection, but it didn't matter. Nothing he did made any difference. The screen stayed on, continuing to play impossibly reversed footage of something standing in the exact spot where he had been sitting moments before. The distortion formed a kind of outline around the figure, like static electricity was tracing its edges, but the face was the absolute worst part, blurred and smeared like wet paint dragged across canvas, except 2 dark hollows stared out from the center of it, watching him with terrible focus, evaluating him like a specimen. By the time the system finally powered down completely, Dragon was shaken in a way no one on the crew had ever witnessed before. When the tech team checked all the equipment the next morning, they found absolutely nothing. No corrupted files, no glitch logs, no abnormal activity recorded anywhere in the system. There was no trace of the silhouette, no evidence the monitors had ever malfunctioned, no proof that anything unusual had happened at all. But Dragon knew exactly what he had seen, and from that night forward, he absolutely refused to stay in the command trailer alone under any circumstances. The breaking point came during what should have been just another routine nighttime perimeter sweep. Dragon had completed hundreds of these walks over the years, checking fence lines, monitoring sensors, logging wildlife activity. It was muscle memory by that point. But this particular night, the air felt fundamentally wrong from the moment he stepped outside. Even the other security personnel later admitted they could feel it too. A heaviness pressing down on everything, like the entire ranch was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Halfway through the sweep, Dragon radioed in with something unusual. His voice wasn't panicked, not yet, but it carried an edge the team wasn't accustomed to hearing from him. "Do you copy? I'm getting movement near Sector C, but it's not tripping any of the ground sensors." The command team immediately checked the monitoring system. Dragon was absolutely right. No alerts, no thermal spikes, no motion detection, nothing registering on any equipment, but he kept whispering into the radio that something was pacing him through the trees, staying just barely out of direct sight. He said he could hear it clearly. Slow, deliberate steps, the sound of boots crunching on dirt, the soft push and snap of branches being moved aside. But the thermal drone circling overhead showed only Dragon's heat signature, nothing else. Without warning or explanation, he stopped answering the radio entirely. The command trailer erupted with noise, everyone shouting, scrambling, trying desperately to reach him. By the time the rapid response team arrived at the far corner of the property, they found Dragon standing perfectly still beside the old cottonwood tree near the ravine. His flashlight hung loosely in his hand, beam pointed uselessly at the ground. His pupils were massively dilated despite the bright lights now surrounding him. His breathing was shallow and rapid, like someone who had just witnessed something that shattered their understanding of reality. One of the crew members called his name repeatedly. Dragon didn't react at all. It wasn't until Thomas physically grabbed his shoulder and shook him that Dragon finally snapped out of whatever trance held him, gasping desperately like someone who'd been held underwater for too long. When they frantically asked what had happened, what he'd seen out there in the darkness, he didn't answer coherently. He just kept shaking his head violently, whispering over and over, "You didn't see it. You didn't see what was standing there." The team searched the entire area methodically. No footprints in the soft earth, no thermal traces lingering, no broken branches, absolutely nothing that could explain the absolute terror still trembling through Dragon's body. But when they later reviewed Dragon's body cam footage, something even more deeply unsettling emerged from the recording. At the exact moment Dragon stopped responding to radio calls, the microphone picked up a faint clicking noise in the background, completely unnatural. Not an animal sound, not machinery, something else entirely. something that seemed to be responding directly to his presence. Then underneath the clicking, barely audible, a low, distorted whisper emerged. Audio technicians tried desperately to isolate the sound, filter it, enhance it, understand its origin, but the deeper they analyzed the waveform, the stranger it became. The pattern wasn't consistent with any known human voice. It wasn't mechanical interference. It existed somewhere in between, something that shouldn't be possible. When they showed Dragon the isolated audio clip, he refused to listen to it. After the terrifying incident at the cottonwood tree, Dragon attempted to return to his normal work routine as if nothing significant had happened, but the crew immediately noticed something had fundamentally changed. He was more guarded than ever before, more restless, constantly looking over his shoulder, and for the first time since joining the team years ago, Dragon started keeping critical information off the official record. It began when he insisted on reviewing all overnight surveillance footage completely alone, arriving hours before the rest of the team each morning. At first, nobody questioned this behavior. They assumed he was simply trying to make sense of his recent experiences, searching for patterns or explanations. But then the system logs revealed something deeply odd and concerning. Several files had been accessed, viewed multiple times, and then manually copied into a heavily encrypted folder under Dragon's personal login credential. Footage that was suddenly no longer accessible to anyone else on the team, including Brandon Fugel himself. When confronted about this unusual behavior, Dragon brushed it off dismissively as routine security archiving, standard protocol for sensitive material. But the explanation didn't sit right with anyone. He had never done anything like this before in all his years on the property, and he certainly had never locked the investigative team out of potentially crucial data. Then came the night that truly alarmed everyone. Brandon Fugel himself flew in urgently from Salt Lake City, responding to a private message Dragon had sent him directly, bypassing all normal communication channels. The cameras caught their silhouettes inside the command trailer late that night, voices deliberately muted, door firmly locked from the inside. No one on the crew ever learned what Dragon showed Brandon during that secret meeting, but when Brandon finally emerged hours later, he looked visibly rattled, shaken in a way the ranch had never affected him before despite years of bizarre occurrences. The only real clue came from the drone operator, who later swore under oath that he saw Dragon carefully carrying a small metal case out to his personal truck later that evening, something he had retrieved from the restricted storage room where only the highest level evidence was kept under lock and key. Whatever was contained inside that case, Dragon handled it with extreme care, placing it gently on the passenger seat as if it were fragile or dangerous, and then drove off the property without explaining anything to anyone. The next morning when he returned, Dragon was pale, visibly exhausted, and absolutely refusing to discuss where he had gone or what he had done with the contents of that case. But the change in him was unmistakable and deeply troubling. Dragon had always been strict, intense, occasionally paranoid about security, but now he was something else entirely. He was genuinely afraid, not of intruders or trespassers or even the unknown phenomena. He was terrified of something specific, something the ranch had shown him, something he had locked in that metal case, something he desperately feared would change everything if it ever became public knowledge. And from that day forward, Dragon stopped trusting the ranch's monitoring systems entirely. He stopped trusting the investigation's methodology and conclusions. And worst of all, he stopped trusting the crew members he had worked alongside for years. The night everything finally fell apart began quietly enough. The team was gathered in the command center, carefully reviewing anomalies from the previous night's investigation, when one of the central monitors suddenly flickered without warning, just for a single second, barely noticeable. But in that brief moment, the screen displayed something that sent ice through everyone's veins, a frame that absolutely should not exist anywhere in their footage. On the monitor, clear as day, was an image showing a silhouette standing directly behind Dragon in footage recorded the previous night. Tall, unnaturally thin, completely featureless, and Dragon had never reported seeing anyone or anything during that patrol. When Dragon walked into the command center moments later and immediately saw the frozen image still displayed on the screen, he went completely rigid, every muscle in his body tensed. For several long seconds, he didn't even appear to breathe. "That wasn't there," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Travis stepped forward carefully, studying both the screen and Dragon's reaction. "Dragon, that figure was standing directly behind you in this footage. Are you seriously telling us you didn't see anything unusual during this patrol?" "No," Dragon snapped defensively, but the crack in his voice completely betrayed him. He was lying, or he was in denial, or something far worse. Then the command center radios suddenly hissed with harsh static. Everyone in the room turned toward the speakers simultaneously. A voice whispered through the interference, broken and distant, seemingly impossible to pinpoint or identify. identify. At first, it sounded like random interference, atmospheric noise, radio bounce. Then, unmistakably, crystal clear despite the static, it formed a single word: Brian. The entire team immediately looked at Dragon. His real name, his birth name. Only a small handful of people in his entire life ever called him that. Everyone on the ranch knew him exclusively as Dragon. The radio crackled again, louder this time. The whisper stretched and distorted, taking on an unnatural quality, almost mocking in its tone as it repeated his name slowly. Brian. Dragon stood completely frozen, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his neck stood out. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the desk to steady himself. "That's not normal interference," Travis said quietly, stating the obvious that everyone was thinking. Dragon didn't answer. He couldn't answer. He just stared at the radio speaker, breathing hard through clenched teeth, looking like he was holding back either rage or panic or both. Then the whisper returned one final time, clearer than before, and every single hair on the back of Dragon's neck visibly stood up. 2 words that would haunt him forever. "Behind you." Dragon spun around so violently and so fast that he knocked over an expensive equipment chair, sending it crashing to the floor. Nothing was there. The space behind him was completely empty, but the precise moment he turned, the entire command center's temperature dropped at least 20 degrees in seconds. People's breath became visible. The monitoring cameras flickered erratically, and then the same silhouette from the frozen footage appeared again, but this time on a live feed broadcasting in real time, standing in the exact spot where Dragon had been positioned just seconds before. When Dragon saw his own image on the screen with that thing standing where he'd just been, he whispered something that absolutely no one on the crew had ever heard from him before in all their years working together. "I'm done." And for the first time in the entire recorded history of the show, Dragon turned and walked out of the command center without completing a security lockdown protocol. Dragon didn't return to the command center that night. He stayed outside alone, pacing the dirt road toward the gate. Every few minutes he would stop, turn sharply, and stare into the tree line like he expected something to step out. The team watched from monitors, unsure whether to intervene. By sunrise, Dragon was sitting on his truck's tailgate, shoulders slumped, staring at the ground. When Travis approached, Dragon didn't look up. "It's not the ranch," he muttered. "It's me." Travis frowned. "What does that mean?" Dragon took a long breath. "This place doesn't follow you. It chooses you, and something out there chose me a long time ago." He explained that before the show ever aired, before Brandon bought the ranch, something appeared to him on the West Ridge, a shimmering distortion that moved without sound. He never filed a report, never told anyone. "It watched me," he whispered, like it already knew everything about me. The team listened in stunned silence. "And now it's back," he said. "It's following me again." When the crew prepared for the next investigation, Dragon didn't suit up. He walked to Brandon's truck, dropped his security badge on the hood, and said only one sentence: "If I stay here, it won't stop." He climbed into his truck and drove toward the gate. The cameras caught one final shot in his rearview mirror. His face pale, eyes fixed on the mesa behind him. 1 week after Dragon drove off Skinwalker Ranch for the final time, Brandon Fugel quietly confirmed what everyone already knew. Dragon had officially stepped away. No contract dispute, no salary negotiation. He left because something wasn't just observing him anymore. It was calling him by name. But leaving didn't end it. According to those who've seen him since, Dragon's life has become unrecognizable. He lives alone now, far from Utah, in a location he refuses to reveal. Friends say he's reclusive, distrustful of electronics, paranoid about being watched. He checks windows obsessively. He sleeps with lights on. He refuses to discuss the ranch. One former crew member reached him by phone last year. Dragon answered but said only 3 words before hanging up: "It's still here." Others report he's moved multiple times, always at night, always without warning, like he's running from something that won't let go. The tragedy of Bryant Arnold isn't that he left Skinwalker Ranch. It's that part of the ranch left with him. And no matter how far he runs, whatever chose him that night on the West Ridge is still watching, still waiting, still calling his name in the dark. Footage from Skinwalker Ranch security cameras documents Dr. Travis Taylor's physical deterioration across 5 seasons, 3 hospitalizations for radiation exposure, weight loss, personality changes, and the moment he collapsed during an experiment. Subscribe now because what cameras captured explains why Travis walked away from the most important investigation of his career. His doctors confirmed radiation poisoning exceeding nuclear worker limits. His family gave an ultimatum: quit or lose them. A classified Pentagon briefing revealed government knew about health risks for decades. The final experiment disrupted his heart rhythm, proving continuation could be fatal. This is why he left. When Dr. Travis Taylor appeared in Season 5 episodes of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, viewers familiar with his energetic scientific enthusiasm noticed something had fundamentally changed about the astrophysicist who served as chief scientist since Season 1. Production footage reviewed by investigators and media outlets reveals physical deterioration that became progressively apparent across Season 5 filming, despite editors' attempts to minimize visible decline through careful shot selection and strategic editing. Early Season 1 episodes show Travis as robust and energetic, constantly moving between experiment locations, eagerly discussing theoretical frameworks, displaying boundless enthusiasm characteristic of someone discovering genuinely anomalous phenomena worthy of serious scientific investigation. By contrast, Season 5 footage shows noticeably thinner, Travis moving more slowly between locations, frequently pausing during conversations as if struggling to maintain concentration, exhibiting visible fatigue during investigations that previously energized him, and displaying physical mannerisms suggesting chronic pain, including frequent grimacing, careful movement patterns protecting specific body areas, and visible discomfort during activities requiring extended standing or physical exertion. Behind-the-scenes footage, never broadcast, reveals even more concerning details, including Travis requiring extended breaks between filming segments, production crew expressing concern about his appearance, and multiple instances where Travis requested sitting down during investigations he would previously have conducted while standing and moving throughout areas. Medical experts who reviewed selected footage noted Travis displayed classic signs of someone experiencing chronic radiation exposure effects, including visible weight loss, suggesting metabolic disruption, skin changes including unusual pigmentation patterns, and what appeared to be radiation burns in various healing stages, hair thinning consistent with follicle damage from ionizing radiation exposure, and movement patterns suggesting peripheral neuropathy causing pain or numbness in extremities. The most disturbing aspect of reviewing this footage chronologically involves watching a brilliant scientist who began the investigation, healthy, skeptical, and scientifically rigorous, gradually transform into someone who appeared physically compromised, emotionally exhausted, and according to those close to production, privately questioning whether continuing the investigation justified the mounting personal health costs he was paying. Colleagues who worked with Travis across multiple seasons later stated they watched him change from someone who bounded up the mesa with equipment to someone who struggled with the climb. Across 5 seasons of filming at Skinwalker Ranch, Dr. Travis Taylor required emergency medical treatment and hospitalization on 3 separate occasions, following experiments that exposed him to dangerous radiation levels or triggered acute medical emergencies that production staff and fellow investigators witnessed in real time. The first hospitalization occurred during Season 2 following a high-energy experiment on the mesa where the team was conducting electromagnetic pulse tests near the location where ground-penetrating radar had detected the massive underground metallic structure. Travis was operating equipment when he suddenly experienced what he described as the worst headache of his life, intense pressure inside his skull that felt like his head would explode, followed by uncontrollable nosebleed and temporary vision disturbances, including blind spots and inability to focus on objects. Emergency room physicians who examined Travis documented dangerously elevated intracranial pressure, the pressure of cerebrospinal fluid surrounding brain and spinal cord, with measurements typically seen only in patients with brain tumors, severe head trauma, or acute infections. Comprehensive CT scans and MRI imaging found no tumors, no bleeding, no structural abnormalities that would explain the sudden pressure spike, leaving medical professionals unable to provide explanation for what caused this acute medical emergency. Blood work revealed Travis had been exposed to significant ionizing radiation during the experiment based on cellular damage markers and biomarker patterns, though investigators could not identify the radiation source or explain how exposure occurred. The second hospitalization happened during Season 3 when the team was conducting drilling operations, attempting to reach the underground structure. Travis suddenly experienced severe vertigo, described as the entire environment spinning violently, followed by uncontrollable vomiting and complete loss of consciousness that required team members to physically carry him off the mesa because he couldn't stand or walk. Hospital neurological examination and emergency brain MRI revealed temporary inflammation and swelling in specific brain regions associated with electromagnetic sensitivity and vestibular function controlling balance and spatial orientation. Neurologists documented that the inflammation pattern was consistent with exposure to extremely powerful electromagnetic fields, but couldn't identify environmental sources that would produce fields strong enough to cause this level of acute brain tissue response. The third hospitalization occurred during Season 4, when the team conducted a 1.6 gigahertz frequency generation experiment, attempting to stimulate response from the underground structure. Travis experienced sudden severe chest pain, irregular heartbeat, and breathing difficulty. Following Dr. Travis Taylor's third hospitalization and increasingly frequent episodes of unexplained medical symptoms occurring between filming sessions, his personal physicians conducted comprehensive medical evaluations, including specialized testing protocols designed to detect radiation exposure effects and assess cumulative damage from repeated exposure to ionizing radiation across multiple years. Blood work revealed alarming patterns, including significantly depressed white blood cell counts indicating bone marrow suppression, elevated liver enzymes suggesting organ stress from processing radiation-damaged cellular material, and unusual concentrations of specific biomarkers that medical literature associates with chronic radiation exposure rather than acute single-exposure incidents. Bone marrow biopsy performed to investigate the white blood cell suppression revealed cellular damage patterns that hematologists confirmed were consistent with ionizing radiation exposure, causing damage to stem cells responsible for blood cell production. Most concerning to Travis's medical team, the damage appeared cumulative rather than acute, suggesting repeated exposure over extended time frames had created progressive deterioration of bone marrow function that could potentially lead to more serious hematological conditions, including increased cancer risk, immune system dysfunction, and potentially life-threatening complications if exposure continued. Additional specialized testing measured chromosomal damage in Travis's cells using techniques that detect radiation-induced breaks and aberrations in DNA structure. Results showed significantly elevated levels of chromosomal damage compared to normal population baselines, with damage patterns that radiation biologists confirmed were characteristic of exposure to mixed radiation fields, including both electromagnetic radiation and potentially particle radiation from unknown sources. Travis's physicians provided him with explicit medical advice that continuing to work in environments with elevated radiation levels posed serious long-term health risks, including substantially increased cancer probability, accelerated aging of multiple organ systems, potential permanent immune system compromise, and possibility of acute life-threatening events if he experienced another severe exposure incident. The physicians documented that Travis's cumulative radiation exposure across 5 seasons of Skinwalker Ranch investigation had already exceeded recommended lifetime limits for occupational radiation workers in nuclear facilities, and continuing exposure could push him into ranges associated with deterministic health effects that occur with certainty rather than probability once exposure thresholds are crossed. Travis was advised in unambiguous medical terms that he needed to either cease working at locations with elevated radiation or accept that he was making a conscious choice to sacrifice long-term health for short-term investigative goals. Behind the public-facing professional image of Dr. Travis Taylor as enthusiastic scientist pursuing groundbreaking investigation at Skinwalker Ranch, his immediate family was watching someone they loved deteriorate physically and psychologically under pressures they felt powerless to stop. Travis's wife, whose identity he has protected by never naming publicly in interviews or on the show, witnessed her husband's transformation from healthy scientist, excited about investigating genuine anomalies, into someone experiencing chronic health problems, frequent medical emergencies, and psychological effects that changed his personality and behavior at home. She watched him lose significant weight despite eating normally, observed him experiencing chronic pain that required increasingly strong pain medication, noticed his hair thinning and skin developing unusual discoloration patterns, and became alarmed when he began having nightmares so severe he would wake up screaming without memory of what he dreamed. His children, who had initially thought their father's work on a television show about mysterious phenomena was exciting and made him seem cool to their friends, began expressing concerns about why Daddy kept going to the hospital, why he looked tired all the time, and why he seemed different when he came home from filming trips. According to sources close to the family, Travis's wife reached a breaking point during season 4, following his third hospitalization when she realized the pattern was escalating rather than improving, and that each subsequent medical emergency seemed more severe than the previous one. She gave Travis an ultimatum that forced him to choose between continuing his work at Skinwalker Ranch and maintaining his marriage and relationship with his children. The ultimatum was delivered in unambiguous terms. Either quit the show and stop exposing yourself to whatever is causing these medical emergencies, or accept that the family cannot continue living with the constant fear that the next phone call will be hospital staff informing them you've had another medical crisis or worse. She explained that the children were developing anxiety about him leaving for filming trips because they feared he wouldn't come back, that she couldn't sleep during filming periods because she was terrified of receiving emergency calls, and that the psychological toll on the entire family of watching him deteriorate was unsustainable regardless of how important he believed the scientific investigation to be. Travis faced an impossible choice between pursuing the most scientifically significant investigation of his career and maintaining the family relationships that gave his life meaning beyond professional accomplishment. During season 4 filming, Dr. Travis Taylor participated in a classified briefing with Department of Defense officials and Pentagon representatives who had maintained ongoing interest in Skinwalker Ranch phenomena since the 1990s, when the property was owned by Robert Bigelow and investigated under the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program. This classified briefing, which Travis has obliquely referenced in interviews without providing details due to non-disclosure agreements, apparently provided him with historical context about government knowledge of the ranch that fundamentally changed his understanding of what he was investigating and the risks he was accepting by continuing the work. According to sources familiar with the briefing content, Pentagon officials shared classified data about health effects experienced by previous investigators who had worked at the ranch during the Bigelow ownership period under government contract. This historical health data revealed that Travis's medical emergencies and radiation exposure were not unique anomalies, but rather part of a documented pattern affecting multiple investigators who had spent extended time conducting experiments at the ranch. The classified files apparently contained medical records showing that several previous investigators had experienced similar symptom patterns, including unexplained radiation exposure, acute medical emergencies during experiments, progressive health deterioration over time, and in at least one case, permanent health damage requiring the investigator to end their career in physics and accept disability status. Most disturbing to Travis, the briefing apparently revealed that government officials had known about these health risks for decades but had not warned current investigators about the documented pattern because doing so would require acknowledging classified information about previous government investigation of the property. The briefing also apparently provided Travis with technical data about the underground structure that government analysts had collected in the 1990s, showing radiation emission patterns and electromagnetic field characteristics that explained why investigators working directly above or in proximity to the structure experienced acute health effects. Travis reportedly pressed the Pentagon officials about why they had allowed current investigation to proceed without warning about known health risks, and received responses suggesting that the potential scientific and national security value of the investigation outweighed concerns about individual investigator health, particularly since participation was voluntary and investigators had signed comprehensive liability waivers. This revelation that government had knowingly allowed him to expose himself to documented health hazards apparently contributed significantly to Travis's decision to walk away. Production footage that never made it into broadcast episodes of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch documents some of Dr. Travis Taylor's most severe medical incidents and psychological episodes that network executives and production company leadership determined were too disturbing for television broadcast, or would raise questions about investigator safety that could expose the production to liability concerns. One particular incident captured on multiple camera angles during Season 3 filming shows Travis conducting an experiment near the triangle area of the property when he suddenly stopped moving, stood completely still for approximately 15 seconds with what production staff described as a blank expression, and then collapsed to the ground, losing consciousness. The footage shows team members including Brandon Fugel and Eric Bard rushing to Travis's position, attempting to revive him by calling his name and checking vital signs, and appearing genuinely frightened by his unresponsive state. Audio captured by boom microphones records someone saying, "Call an ambulance," and another voice saying, "His pulse is really weak." Travis regained consciousness after approximately 30 seconds and appeared disoriented. asking where he was, and initially not recognizing the people surrounding him. This footage was deemed too disturbing for broadcast because it would raise obvious questions about whether continuing investigation was worth risking scientists' lives. Additional unaired footage documents Travis experiencing what appear to be psychological effects during and after certain experiments, including moments where his speech patterns changed. His typical scientific vocabulary was replaced with disjointed statements that didn't follow logical progression, and his affect became flat and emotionless in ways completely inconsistent with his normal energetic personality. In one particularly disturbing sequence that sources close to production say was immediately flagged by editors as unusable for broadcast, Travis is conducting an electromagnetic experiment when he begins speaking in what sounds like a different voice with different vocal characteristics and cadence patterns, saying things that don't relate to the experiment and that he later claimed to have no memory of saying. Production crew members visible in the background of this footage appear visibly uncomfortable and confused, with at least one person backing away from Travis and another making a gesture that appears to be crossing themselves as if witnessing something spiritually disturbing. When Travis returned to normal consciousness and personality, he asked what had happened and appeared genuinely disturbed when crew members attempted to describe what they had witnessed. Network executives reportedly viewed this footage and immediately determined it could never be broadcast. Individuals who worked closely with Dr. Travis Taylor across multiple seasons of Skinwalker Ranch filming noticed progressive personality changes that extended beyond simple fatigue or stress from demanding production schedules, and instead suggested something more fundamental was affecting his psychological state and cognitive function. Early seasons showed Travis as consistently upbeat, enthusiastic about every experiment regardless of outcome, quick with jokes and humor even during long filming days, and maintaining genuine scientific curiosity and open-mindedness about anomalous data, even when it contradicted his initial hypotheses. By season 4, and especially season 5, colleagues noticed Travis had become notably more serious, sometimes going hours without joking or displaying his characteristic humor, appearing withdrawn during breaks between filming when he would previously socialize with team members, and displaying occasional emotional volatility, including moments of irritation or frustration over minor issues that he would previously have handled with patience and good humor. Eric Bard, who worked closely with Travis on numerous experiments, later commented in interviews that watching Travis's personality change across seasons was concerning, and that there were moments when Travis didn't seem like Travis, describing instances where the brilliant scientist he knew seemed absent and replaced by someone going through the motions without the passion and intellectual engagement that had characterized his earlier work. Dragon, the ranch security chief who interacted with Travis regularly, noted in off-camera comments to production staff that Travis seemed increasingly haunted as seasons progressed, using that specific word to describe someone who appeared to be carrying psychological weight beyond normal job stress. Thomas Winterton, the ranch superintendent who spent extensive time with Travis during investigations, observed that Travis became notably more cautious and even fearful during certain experiments in later seasons, sometimes expressing reluctance to proceed with planned activities or suggesting modifications to keep team members at safer distances from phenomena, representing a significant change from his earlier willingness to personally expose himself to potential risks in pursuit of data. Most concerning to several colleagues was Travis's increasingly frequent mention of dreams and nightmares involving the ranch, with Travis occasionally describing in disturbing detail dreams where he was trapped underground or being watched by something he couldn't see. These dream descriptions began appearing more frequently in Travis's casual conversation during season 4, and became more intense and more frequently mentioned during season 5, suggesting to those who knew him well that something about the ranch was penetrating his subconscious. Dr. Travis Taylor's decision to walk away from Skinwalker Ranch crystallized during a specific experiment conducted near the end of season 5, filming that produced effects severe enough to convince him that continuing the investigation would require accepting risks he was no longer willing to take, given his family situation and mounting health concerns. The experiment involved generating high-energy electromagnetic pulses directed toward the Mesa area where the underground structure has been detected, using equipment capable of producing significantly more power than previous experiments in an attempt to stimulate measurable response from whatever generates the ranch's anomalous phenomena. Travis was operating the pulse generator and monitoring instrumentation when the equipment suddenly surged beyond programmed parameters, producing energy levels substantially higher than intended and creating electromagnetic fields strong enough to cause visible electrical arcing in the surrounding air. In that moment, Travis experienced what he later described as the most intense physical sensation of his entire time at the ranch, a feeling of being simultaneously frozen in place and pulled toward the ground by forces he couldn't see, combined with sudden overwhelming nausea and a sensation he described as feeling like his DNA was being pulled apart at the molecular level. The experience lasted approximately 10 to 15 seconds before the equipment automatically shut down due to safety protocols. But Travis immediately knew something was seriously wrong because he could feel his heart beating irregularly, and his vision had developed strange distortions where straight lines appeared curved and colors seemed oversaturated and unnatural. Team members present reported that Travis looked like he'd seen a ghost, with his face pale and expression displaying genuine fear rather than the scientific curiosity that usually characterized his reactions to anomalous events. Travis requested that filming stop and told Brandon Fugel privately that he needed to end the investigation day immediately and seek medical evaluation. Hospital examination revealed Travis's heart rhythm had been disrupted into an arrhythmia pattern that cardiologists confirmed could have progressed to life-threatening cardiac arrest if it had continued. The cardiac arrhythmia appeared to have been triggered by the intense electromagnetic pulse exposure during the experiment, representing a direct causal link between ranch phenomena and potentially fatal medical emergency. This incident, coming after years of accumulated smaller incidents and mounting pressure from family, apparently represented the final straw that convinced Travis he needed to step away from regular investigation participation before the next incident killed him. Following his departure, Travis focused on health recovery and family. Medical monitoring showed gradual improvement in white blood cell counts and liver enzymes, though doctors warned chromosomal damage and increased cancer risk remain permanent consequences. Travis states publicly the ranch represents the most significant scientific anomaly of his career, but acknowledges the personal cost was higher than I understood. He occasionally consults remotely without physical ranch presence. His relationship with Brandon Fugel remains positive. Travis believes investigation must continue because phenomena are real and important, but future investigators need better safety protocols and transparent warnings about documented health risks.